Certificates of insurance are pretty much garbage in my opinion most of the time. And that's a pretty bold statement. But the reason is I want to see all the documentation. There's no financial recourse via bonds or subcontractor default insurance to provide coverage or protection for the owner and or lender. Now, this is why it's so important as the lender. My name is Douglas Francisco of Spartan Risk Management. I have personally handled over $12 billion of construction reviews for lenders. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is lender risk on new ground up construction deals. You know, a lot of times on smaller deals, you might not think there's as much of a risk. There's always a risk. And one of the things that we do, one of the reasons why I started my company was to help both owners, developers, and lenders protect, on the lending side, protect your collateral. Unfortunately, what we see many times in the marketplace is if it's not required, even on certain size deals, the owners, developers don't get the coverage, right? It's my job, depending on who the client is, to tell you what the exposure is and decide whether you're going to require the insurance or purchase the insurance. But what I'm seeing, and it's at times it's disheartening, right? But I'm seeing owners decide not to purchase insurance coverage that could actually protect them or have requirements that could protect them. And I'm seeing this now over and over and over again. So if you're a lender and you're lending on ground up construction, these are some things that you might want to keep in mind. And these are actually what we're going to talk about right now are live examples that I've had in the last 12 months of one deal specifically. There was a huge risk of it actually going back to the bank. And if you're a lender, I can promise you, I know that you're not in the business to take on a construction project. You don't want that. You're wanting to lend money to get a return on the money, but you don't want to operate a construction project. So let's get into the case study real quick. So a lot of what we do is multifamily. Multifamily is one of the harder classes to underwrite, to review, usually based on, type of construction and a resident base. We're not going to get too much into that right now, but we're just going to, this, for example, was a garden style. What do I mean by garden style? We're going to do a ground plat view, right? So, developer starts a new project, right? They're going to come in, they've got their civils, and there's a reason why I'm mentioning civil engineer in this. They're going to move around the property per the civil requirements. We got our groundwork guys that are going to come in, and then we're going to start going vertical. So, garden style just means typically there's multiple buildings over a site, anywhere from 2 to 4 stories, typically, right? This one I think was 2 stories. There's some things that are missed. I'm going to talk about that here today that could have protected this deal, right? So on any ground up construction, what do we have? We need property insurance, also called builder's risk. We have liability insurance. And there's different types. I'll talk about that. I'll talk about some of the issues here. And third, we want to talk about a financial risk, which are bonds. We can transfer this risk via bonds or SDI, subcontractor default insurance. And this was a big one on this project, right? I was not part of this. I came in to try and help salvage as possible. But the liability program was not done correctly. And what do I mean by that? That's a broad statement. But there was not a specific program-specific insurance policy that provided coverage for the entire project. This project was large enough to have what we call an OSIP, or an owner-controlled insurance program. And the benefit of an OSIP is you have coverage for the entire project, for all of the subcontractors, right? There's some management that goes into the OSIP, but this project was large enough to qualify for something called an OSIP. Not all are, but when they are, we always want to have an OSIP because that provides the most protection. Unfortunately, this project did not have an OSIP, and what happened? The owner-developer, who was also acting as a general contractor, was depending on every single subcontractor to have proper insurance. That's a big ask in a project like this. Why? Because someone has to actively manage that. No one was actively managing it, right? So in this example, the subcontractors' contracts did not mirror the insurance. No one was even getting certificates of insurance. Certificates of insurance are pretty much garbage in my opinion most of the time, and that's a pretty bold statement, but the reason is I want to see all the documentation. The certificate is just a summary. I'm going to want to see the insurance policy. I'm going to want to see the endorsements naming our owner or you as the lender, right? So those are one of the services we provide. But the biggest one of the biggest pitfalls on this project was a liability. They didn't have the proper program, and because they didn't have the proper program, no one was even managing it. So we had a plumbing contractor at this site that had a faulty connection which damaged many, many units, right? And it wasn't discovered until we had the certificate of occupancy. At that time, we discovered there was an issue. We had to break into the walls of, I think it was 60 units at this property, right? And additionally, the plumbing contractor went out of business midway through, right? So what happened is the intent of the liability program is not necessarily to replace the faulty work. It is to replace any resulting damage of the work. I'm not going to get into that here, but the plumbing contractor also went out of business, right? So we didn't even have the proper liability evidence to provide coverage for that plumbing contractor that caused the damage, right? And then secondly, the contractor went insolvent, literally went insolvent through the middle of the project. There's no financial recourse via bonds or subcontractor default insurance to provide coverage or protection for the owner and or lender. Now, this is why it's so important as the lender. This project literally was about 30 days away from being given back to the bank. What do I mean? They couldn't meet their interest reserve payments, right? This was bad. This was very bad. And this was a big enough project where there should have been a better review done, for the lender. I don't know if someone did a lender review, if they did it in-house. That's one of the things that we provide is lender review services. Again, I've done over $12 billion of construction-related services. I know the industry very well. I know the construction segment very well, specifically for multifamily. So, biggest pitfalls on this project, liability. They didn't even have the proper insurance. No one was checking the insurance. They should have had an owner-controlled insurance program. They didn't have it. On the financial side, they didn't require any bonding or SDI. I'm going to go back and talk about the importance of this too, because we had two major issues. We had one, a plumbing contractor, and two, a civil engineer issue. Easy on my writing. I do a better job at reviewing insurance than I do writing, I promise you. So, our plumbing contractor, we didn't even have proper coverage, evidence of coverage for a project like this. This was over a $100 million project. No one was checking the insurance. They should have had an OSIP or a project-specific policy. They didn't, and no one was even checking the sub-levels. So that's one issue. And you can never take ever for granted. One of the biggest things in the business now is I don't care what size it is, how big a project is, how big the organization or company is, there are always things that are missed, right? I guess I'm amazed sometimes at the size. I mean, things get overlooked. People are busy. Sometimes it's not intentional. They just are overlooked. So that's what we do. We come in, we look at the details. So on this example, there was not a proper liability program in place. We had major issues from the plumbing contractor. We didn't have proof of coverage. There was a loss that was not covered, right? Secondly, on the civil contractor, they caused issues, and no one correctly looked at the evidence of insurance from the civil contractor. There's a very large civil contractor. We had a very basic evidence of insurance, but this was a professional liability exposure, right? It ended up going into litigation. But had we had just simple, very basic coverage evidence that they should have had, right, it would have provided protection and means of recourse for the owner, and lender, right? And the reason why I'm harping on lender here is this deal literally became so close to being handed back to the bank. So a lot of what we do is on the owner-developer side, but the more I'm involved on the owner side, I see a lot, and we do lender consulting, and we're actually growing in that because more and more deals I'm seeing they don't have the proper coverage. And there's a lot of lenders that have collateral out there without proper protection. So if you're a lender, if you're lending in the construction space, make sure someone is doing an insurance review. It's not as simple as just checking a box and making sure you have builder's risk or a liability program. Maybe it's looking at the financial product, bonds and SDI. Even on the liability program, we're not going to talk too much about it at this point. Make sure you're looking at site assessments, right? What's going on with pollution? A lot of lenders don't look at pollution coverage. It could be an issue, right? You might be breaking ground. It happens. Things are discovered. So want to make sure that someone is qualified to be looking at your reviews on the lending side. It's something that we do. Again, our job is to identify the risk, let you know what the risk is. So as a lender, you know what you feel comfortable providing collateral on. And I definitely know that you as a lender do not want a project back, right? You don't want to operate a construction project. You don't want to take this back. So it's our job to help you with that, help provide some guidance and help make sure there's insurance products in place. So at the time of loss or at the time of this, this was one of our perfect storms from the last year where we had both the liability issue from both the plumbing contractor and the civil engineer. And we had a financial issue because our plumbing contractor went insolvent midway through. So any questions, feel free to reach out, partnerriskmanagement.com. I'd be happy to help you out.